against causation in that case. They will say that the fire department was negligent, they didn't put it out. It was the elements, the drought, the heat, the wind that caused that January 7th fire. So when you're talking about legal causation, there's two important principles. The first is what we call but-for causation. But for the January 1st arson, would the January 7th fire have happened? But the second part is proximate causation, and that is the following. The acts of January 1st have to have been reasonably foreseeable to cause the larger fire on January 7th. Now, obviously, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I believe they were, but expect the defense to argue very aggressively against causation in this case, and maybe try to negotiate some sort of deal down from murder to manslaughter, maybe something closer to 20 years instead of life in federal prison, or even worse, being on death row.
And that would be a major update in this case. Nima, before I let you go, I do want to lastly ask you about some of these civil lawsuits that are potential. We do know that in big cases, oftentimes after an indictment is officially brought, maybe by those in the government or whoever else, some of the families are also going to be seeking justice. Do you foresee any of these potential civil lawsuits not only affecting maybe Rendernecht himself, but other companies? We just named Microsoft with ChatGPT, Uber, all of those. Are they also liable to be tied into anything in the future?
I think the families are going to want to try to bring in these deep pockets. So there were two fires that happened on the 7th. The first is the fire that we're talking about, the Palisades fire. And this arrest actually hurts the civil cases there. And this is why some have filed against the city of LA and the Department of Water and Power, saying that they were negligent. Well, there's broad governmental immunity there. Those were going to be very difficult cases. I don't think they were going to be successful. But now you have the argument in that case, and a very good one, that it wasn't the city at all that was responsible for this fire, but an individual arsonist. So to the extent that those Palisades and Malibu cases weren't dismissed based on immunity, and if they even get to jury trial, now the city's going to have a very good defense that this was a criminal act and that individual should be responsible. And of course, Rendernick, I'm guessing, as an Uber driver, I say this respectfully, probably doesn't have billions of dollars to pay those families. Now, there's a different fire in Altadena and Pasadena that was caused by Edison. So those civil cases will go forward, and I expect them to be successful. There's already settlement discussions and a fund being set up by the same person who actually administered the 9/11 fund. But as far as the Palisades and Malibu fires are concerned, and civil lawsuits, and those victims being made whole, I think today's arrest is criminal justice, but I don't think those homeowners are going to be able to recover from Rendernick or anyone, whether it's Uber, Microsoft, or anyone really with the ability to pay here.
Anima, even watching some of this video back from, honestly, a lot that we aired here on Live Now from Fox, still heartbreaking to see the communities that were damaged by these fires. We certainly appreciate Nima Rahmani, legal analyst, for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Again, with you having such a connection there in Southern California to understanding the impact, we'll continue to see and watch this case as it moves forward.
Thank you, Christina. Great being on as always.
All right, we certainly appreciate Nima. And so what we're going to do now is take this time to slide away for a quick 2-minute commercial break. But before we go, I do want to put up this on your screen as well from Bill Malusian. He says that per the federal complaint versus the Palisades fire arson suspect, Jonathan Renderneck, he asked ChatGPT, are you at fault if a fire is he meant to say lit, I should say, because of your cigarettes. Shortly after, cell phone data placed him at the scene of the fire, breaking out in the Palisades in the early morning hours of New Year's Day. And so much to still uncover here. We'll certainly keep up with it on Live Now from Fox. Let's take this opportunity to slide away for a quick 2-minute commercial break. Stay with us. Thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. We do want to continue on with our coverage of some of today's top stories and live events. Of course, we've been talking about it really all week long as we're getting updates as the National Guard, those troops are now entering the Chicago area. I do want to put this up on your screen. We're seeing several vantage points thanks to our friends and partners there at Fox 32 in Chicago, showing us what's happening as several protests have been there in the city against the federalization of the National Guard. And so what we now know, according to the Associated Press, the governor of Illinois said today that he's still in the dark about where the Trump administration will send those National Guard troops who have reported to an Army training site southwest of Chicago. This is where extra fencing and tarps have gone up to block the public's view. And so President Trump, meanwhile, has sent barbs from Washington saying on social media that Governor J.B. Pritzker and the Chicago mayor, both Democrats, as you see, our camera shots getting a bit shaky there. And so we're going to continue to listen in. And so, as you see, just wanted to make sure that we brought that to you here on Live Now from Fox. But President Trump talking there about the National Guard protest in talking about the National Guard's presence, I should say, in Chicago. And so we did just get some very breaking news into our newsroom. This is something that, of course, we've been following very extensively. This officially coming out. We've been following the impacts and the everything that has happened since October 7th, 2023. And now on social media, it's official that President Trump is announcing the first phase of a ceasefire and peace agreement between Israel and Hamas. And so what I want to put up on your screen right now as we're continuing to talk is a live look there in the Gaza Strip. And so it's, as you can see, in the overnight hours, but this was posted on Truth Social just moments ago. He said, "I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as the first steps towards a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers." Signed, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. And this is groundbreaking. I mean, we've been following this since, again, this initially broke out there, the conflict between Israel and Hamas happening there on October 7th with that surprise attack that those on Hamas's side made there on several different areas in Israel. And we've been listening into hostage rallies, everything over the last 2 years, those pleading out for there to be released and some peace to be brought to this region, still taking this live look there in Gaza. We've watched this camera even as attacks were actively happening, bringing you those images here on Live Now from Fox. And so we have the Truth Social post up on your screen now, just so you're able to see a snippet. But if you're just now joining us here on Live Now from Fox, this is from President Trump himself saying that I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. And so this is a conversation that many thought that may happen. Of course, we know that earlier this week, Steve Witkoff, he's the special envoy to the Middle East, was heading there to have discussions about making this come to a close. In fact, we just reported to you, I'm going to put this up on your screen as well. This is from Caroline Leavitt. She was talking about the fact that President Trump was going to be visiting Walter Reed Medical Center for a planned meeting and remarks over the troops. But while he was there, the president is set to stop by for his routine yearly checkup. It's important because this next statement that Caroline Leavitt released there from the White House saying that he will then return to the White House, President Trump is considering going to the Middle East shortly thereafter. This to me indicates that maybe this was already possibly on the table and that the president knew that he needed to get this checkup before eventually going there. There were reports out that he could be there as soon as Sunday. And so again, this is breaking news just coming into our newsroom. President Trump now saying that Israel and Hamas have agreed to sign the first phase of a Gaza deal. And so we're going to continue to stay right here with you on Live Now from Fox. We're not going to go away for any commercial breaks, but continue to really just dive into what this potentially means as we are now moving forward. And so this, again, and as we're covering all of this, we've seen the protest on both sides, folks speaking out everywhere about whether or not and how their feelings are towards the war, because it's tied to so many people individually, showing you this live vantage point that have there in the Gaza Strip. We've been hearing reports also about how things are going on. Again, the Associated Press just starting to put out some more information there. Again, we know that Trump has made this announcement on his Truth Social site, saying this is the first phase. And so right now, we don't have any details about what that means. And ultimately, those are the questions that are going to continue to be asked in the coming days and weeks. And so hopefully, even in the next few hours or so, that information will continue to come to us, and we'll bring it to you here on Live Now from Fox. But this is major. Hamas and Israel agreeing to form the first phase of a deal. And so, of course, we've been watching and following as these hostage negotiations have been going on. And so with these hostage negotiations that have been happening, that's really been one of the main things that folks have been focused on, trying to understand where this goes next. But we do have a little bit more information from the Associated Press just on what is slated to potentially happening this week. Of course, they're once again reporting that President Trump said today that he's considering that trip to the Middle East within just a few days. This is a major show of optimism as those officials from the U.S. and Qatar did travel to an Egyptian resort for the third day of ongoing negotiations to end the Israel-Hamas war. And so this is what President Trump said as he was at a roundtable that we aired earlier here on Live Now from Fox. He said, I may go there sometime towards the end of the week, saying that negotiations are going well. This was just a hint, though, earlier today. So we were watching this and waiting to see if we would get official confirmation. We do know that President Trump has since put it out on his Truth Social site. If you're just now joining us or turning on your TVs here on Live Now from Fox, I want to make sure that we are continuing to update you and keep you at the very precipice of what's happening. So as we're at the top of the hour now, this was just put out on social media. We've been covering it ever since it was put out, with President Trump saying that I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as the first steps towards a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers. Donald J. Trump signing that off, President of the United States of America. And so this tweet that you're seeing there on your screen, it doesn't show the full statement. I wanted to make sure we're continuing to read it out for you here on Live Now from Fox. But ultimately, this was put out on the Truth Social site. This is the latest news that we now know. This is the first phase. And so again, so many questions will continue to unfold as we're watching and waiting here for more information. So we're going to keep toggling between a few of these shots and showing you what we're now having, hopefully getting some reaction as well from some of those other lawmakers in response to President Trump putting this out on his social media accounts. But as you can see there, another live look there in Gaza over the skyline. And as I was saying, just continuing to provide you some more context about what we were watching based off of the comments that President Trump made a bit earlier today during that White House roundtable. And so that hint came when they were on air, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio actually passed President Trump a note on the White House stationery that read, "You need to approve a Truth Social post soon so you can announce the deal first." Truth Social, of course, is where we got this information. This is also where President Trump often makes those big announcements. The note then prompted Trump to proclaim, "We're very close to a deal in the Middle East." Of course, that coming just a couple of hours later with that official post being bought on social media. And so we're going to take a second here on Live Now from Fox. I'm going to talk to my producers behind the scene as we're still learning more information. Stay right here with us. All right, so we are going to continue on with our coverage here on Live Now from Fox. But once again, this is the breaking news that President Trump has officially announced this first phase of the peace deal there in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. This fighting has been going on for 2 years. In fact, it was just yesterday that it was the 2-year anniversary of when the fighting officially kicked off once again. And so as we're continuing here, I do want to let you know about more context of things that were happening this week leading up to this. So we do know that the arrival of President Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, today, there for some of those discussions in Egypt, as they were joined by Qatar's prime minister as well. And this was a sign to many that negotiators really aim to dive deeply into the toughest issues of that American plan to end that war in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's top advisor, Ron Dermer, you may have heard that name as well. We've been speaking about him throughout several of these last few developments with this war. We do know that Ron Dermer, Netanyahu's top advisor, was also present for those peace talks. So Hamas said that it's seeking firm guarantees from those mediators that Israel won't resume its military campaign in the Palestinian territory after the militant groups, I should say, releases all of the remaining hostages. And so our shot just switched there on us here on Live Now from Fox. This is of a local hospital that we also often show here on Live Now. Just some of the area there in the Gaza Strip. Of course, the impact of war often ends up where you're seeing some of the destruction and pain that comes to this hospital. So I just wanted to give you some context to why that shot did switch from the skyline there to showing a hospital in the Gaza Strip. But I'm going to put this back up on the screen, just making sure that everybody who's just now turning on their TVs, you may have just gotten an alert to your phone that this has officially happened, that President Trump has announced on his Truth Social that Israel and Hamas have agreed to sign the first phase of a Gaza deal. And so once again, we're talking about some of the events this week that really led many to being optimistic that this was at all possible. So we do know that all sides did express some optimism for a deal to end this 2-year war that has left tens of thousands of Palestinians dead, mostly in the Gaza Strip, and most of the Gaza Strip destroyed over the past few years. But we do know that initial attack on October 7 killed 1,200 Israelis as well. But at the time, earlier this week, it was clear that key parts of the peace plan hadn't been agreed to, including a requirement that Hamas disarm, and the timing and the extent of an Israeli troop withdrawal from Gaza, and the creation of an international body to run the territory after Hamas steps down. So these are all elements that were potentially needing to be agreed on. Again, we do not know exactly what is in this first phase. This is just the announcement that has since been made. So again, the questions are going to continue to come in. And we might have an opportunity to also have you, the audience who's watching and learning with us. We're going to be bringing on some guests in the next few minutes to ask your questions about what you would like to know about this potential and this now official first phase deal signed, according to President Trump, to end the war between Israel and Gaza. And so a Palestinian official who was present there at this meeting said that their participation, I should say, in these talks underscores the aim to encompass all Palestinian groups. Another Palestinian official said negotiators did make headway today on the names of the prisoners who will be released and on guarantees that Israel won't resume fighting if those hostages are ultimately released. But it was that official who spoke on the condition of anonymity because he wasn't allowed to speak publicly about those negotiations, says that Hamas promised to release all living hostages, but would postpone returning the remains of the dead hostages until conditions on the ground in Gaza permit. Now, this is all being reported by the Associated Press. It happened a bit earlier, but again, this was the announcement that was just made on Truth Social with President Trump. So again, we had a shot of the skyline of Gaza. I'm going to put back up, though, a hospital when we've shown many other times in the region there. Another live shot there in the Gaza region as we're discussing it. So what we're going to do is get ready to bring on another guest here to talk about this breaking news. I'm going to talk to him behind the scenes, get ourselves set up, and then we'll dive right into that conversation. But it's important to note, we'll be back with you in about 30 seconds or so. But Israel and Hamas have agreed to sign this first phase of the Gaza deal. We're going to dive into that conversation in just a few moments. Stay with us. All right, if you're just now joining us here on Live Now from Fox, turning on your TVs, we're staying on this breaking news that President Trump has now since announced on Truth Social that Israel and Hamas have agreed to sign the first phase of a Gaza peace deal. And so to talk a lot more about this, as this is a massive international story that's really made so many headlines and affected so many lives as well here in the U.S., I want to bring on John Hanna. He is the Randy and Charles Wax Senior Fellow at GENSA's Center for Defense and Strategy. Of course, we know that John has a very extensive history. I'm going to read off a little bit of his background just so you're able to understand. He served as a senior foreign policy positions for both Democratic and Republican administrations, including as the former Vice President Dick Cheney's National Security Advisor from 2005 to 2009. And so, John, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. I mean, this is a historic announcement that was just made about 10 to 15 minutes or so ago from President Trump, from his Truth Social, saying that Israel and Hamas have now agreed to sign that first phase of a peace deal. Initially, what are some of your reactions to this? How did we get to this point?
Well, first, just unbelievable relief, obviously, for those poor hostages that have been stuck now for 2 full years and a day in those terror tunnels underground. That they'll be finally having some relief, and their families is just absolutely huge for Israel. Everybody, as long as those hostages were stuck there, it was still October 7th for every single Israelis. And to be able to get those hostages back will have a huge healing effect on Israel. And it looks like, I think, this is the crucial step toward ending this war, for better or worse, because Hamas, remember, still exists and hasn't yet agreed to disarm. That's being left to future negotiations. But my guess is that Hamas has cashed in the only chips it has, all of its leverage, because it's gotten some pretty firm assurances, not only from these Arab states who for the first time have come together and said to the president, we're prepared to help you end this war and to put our full power and influence behind it. And you've got a president of the United States who's prepared to give that kind of guarantee to Hamas as well, to get these hostages back, that this is now going to be the end of this war. And we're going to leave everything else on the 20-point peace plan for future ongoing negotiations. But it's even if this is the only step we achieve, it is a huge diplomatic accomplishment for the President of the United States.
And we have another vantage point as well, again, showing this live look there of the Gaza skyline, a shot we've shown so many times over the last 2 years. Putting this up on the screen, this is that same Truth Social post. I want to read it out for you, John, and I would like you to kind of react to some of the things that stand out to you. So I might pause at certain points if you're able to jump in and sort of explain maybe why that verbiage was used from the president, why this was a certain message that was sent out. And so starting here, it says, I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have been both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as the first steps towards a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. I want to point out there, he said that all of the hostages. Now, there's been a lot of concern and conversation about the hostages, maybe some of them aren't still alive at this point. Can you sort of speak to that and what that still could possibly mean for those families?
Sure. We've got something, the count is, depending on who's speaking, somewhere between 45 and 48 hostages still being held by Hamas. Of those, about 20 are believed to be living still, the rest dead. I believe Hamas knows where all 20 living hostages are. There has been a question about those hostages who have been deceased over the course of the past several months, whether or not Hamas and maybe some of the other Palestinian extremist groups that have been holding hostages, where those people are buried, what parts of Gaza does Hamas still have access to those parts of Gaza? Were the people who buried them, have they been killed, those members of Hamas? So there still seem to have been some last minute questions about exactly how many of the dead hostages Hamas can deliver. So we'll still have to see. The one other obviously crucial part of this is that in exchange for these dead and living hostages, Hamas will receive something close to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli jails, including about 250 really hardcore terrorists with massive amounts of Israeli and international blood on their hands, which is going to be very, very difficult for Israel, because the assumption always has to be that a lot of those people, one way or another, are going to return to the fight.
And so I'm glad you were able to break that down for us, especially as it pertains to the amount of potentially alive versus potentially deceased hostages. We've been watching those rallies. They're held every single week. Families just with bleeding hearts asking for their loved ones to be returned truly in whatever form that it's possible. And so I want to move on to the next statement there in the Truth Social post. So I'm going to read it out for you here. It does say that as well, all parties were treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. When we're talking about saying that all parties were treated fairly, is that portion what you're talking about some of the release of those Palestinian prisoners?
I think it's the Palestinian prisoners, certainly, but I do. I continue to wonder, Christina, maybe because I'm just so jaded at that about Hamas's willingness in exchange for nothing else than Palestinian prisoners to surrender what really is its only remaining insurance policy and leverage, that Israel, once these hostages are back in Israeli hands, then it'll be a green light for Israel to continue the war and to kill Hamas to the every last fighter. It's hard for me to believe that Hamas has made that deal and there isn't some kind of private agreement between those Arab states that have backed this deal, that have pressured Hamas to give up these hostages now, and the President of the United States, that they are all basically agreed with these hostages back. Now the war needs to end, and everything else in the Trump 20-point plan, including the disarmament of Hamas, the emergence of a new Palestinian technical government in Gaza, and the entry of some kind of international stabilization force, all of those details remain to be negotiated. And to that extent, after these hostages are returned and once the war ends, Hamas will, in some shape or form, much degraded and diminished, will be able to say, we survived to negotiate another day.
And so that's really what so many people have been waiting for. Your insight is really valuable here. We appreciate you for joining us, John. And again, for folks who are just now turning on their TVs at home, this is the latest information that Israel and Hamas, according to President Trump, have agreed to sign this first phase of a Gaza deal. We've been going through the statement that President Trump put out on his social media account. Really, that's the initial information and all we have to go on until more information continues to come out from some of our partners there at Associated Press as well as Fox News, as they'll continue to put out more details. But continuing on here, he mentions in the latter part of the statement, I'm going to read it verbatim here. He says, we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers. He mentioned 3 nations as all coming to the table with the United States in order to make this happen. We all know that every nation has their own individual agenda. Let's start with Qatar. What was Qatar's reasoning for really trying to step in, be a power player there in the Middle East to negotiate peace between these two groups?
Well, this, of course, has always been Qatar's main calling card. It's a tiny country with a lot of oil and energy resources, but otherwise doesn't have too much to commend it. Has often been a very problematic actor, has relationships with a lot of awful groups in the Middle East, but that's its currency, its ability to talk to these groups, and in a necessary situation that they can hold themselves out as the primary mediators who can talk to these groups, who can bring pressure to bear on them. Of course, Hamas has all of its external leadership just about living in 5-star hotels in Qatar and being funded by the Qataris. So Qatar, in theory, has always had a lot of juice and influence that they could, in theory, use to squeeze Hamas to make this kind of deal. And I think over the last several weeks, that Israeli strike against the Hamas meeting in Qatar, I think probably threw the Qataris for a loop. Everybody saw that the Israelis were dead serious. If they had to take this well beyond Gaza to go after Hamas people, even in the Gulf, in some American allies and friends, they were prepared to do that. So I think the entire region suddenly really came home to them. This is really serious. It's not just happening over there. It's being brought home, this instability and violence, even to states in some level of alliance with the United States. And I think they came to the president and said, we're really ready now. Now we've got to put an end to this. This can't go on. I think the president, for a whole variety of reasons also, over the last several weeks, has come to the conclusion that he's the man. He's the only one who can make this happen. He's the only one who could put together and put on the table a credible plan with the full faith and credit of the United States and the president personally behind it, to really get the entire region, the entire world together, agreeing that now's the time for this to end. And those are the 3 states, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, that really, again, for better or worse, have always had the most extensive relationships with Hamas. And in the crunch, it looks like they've brought Hamas to its senses, that these hostages are no longer a point of real leverage going forward. They're the most useful time to play this card is now, to get this ceasefire, end of the war, get those Palestinian prisoners back, and buy some relief for the people of Gaza, who, of course, have been suffering enormously.
And so I'm going to put this up on the screen as well. This is from Netanyahu, a statement that he was able to put out. My thanks to my producers for getting this to us so quickly. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying this, he said, with God's help, we will bring them all home. That's the quote that's been put out so far. Are you surprised by this being the initial statement that's put out? Did you expect a little bit more? Or what else are we potentially going to be hearing from Netanyahu? This is a massive thing, and I'm sure he has much more to say than just with God's help, we will bring them all home, although that is the point that focuses on the people who have been impacted most by this war.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll hear more from the prime minister. Of course, we're approaching the end this evening of the Sukkot, the initial Sukkot holiday week. So he could be, consumed by other things. But this is, on the one hand, it is the fulfillment of what has been one of the three major Israeli war goals. The promise that they would bring home all of these hostages, dead or alive, they would all come home. That was a major war goal. And it was a goal, frankly, at the beginning of the war on October 7th, you could talk to a lot of Israeli national security experts who would have told you in private, we don't think most of those people are ever coming home. And the fact is that the vast majority have been returned home alive, although tragically, obviously, a large number have also perished over the course of the last 2 years.
And so we did want to make sure we're continuing to bring you these updates. And John, before I let you go, I want to just continue to get sort of an essence of what you've been covering and really been paying attention to over the last 2 years. How were your feelings yesterday as October 7th marked 2 years since this war, everything kicked off with Hamas launching that surprise attack? But then this week, there had already seemed to be some rumblings that peace was in the air, that it was potentially going to happen. Did you believe it when you saw the envoy going to the Middle East with President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff? Did you have faith that it was possible that this potential deal, which is now the first phase that officially has been signed, according to President Trump, has now been enacted?
Yeah, I'd be lying if I told you I had been optimistic. When dealing with Hamas, I think it's almost impossible to be optimistic. But the thought that the president was able, and again, the president of the United States, for the first time in 2 years, being willing to put it, not only the power of our country behind this kind of plan, but his own personal prestige to see it through. And he's been very, very actively engaged. That may not get you full and blown peace, but it gets you a long way down that track when you've got an American president committed to ending this war like this one has been and to getting these hostages back. So I think that's been an absolutely crucial difference. And but I have to say, I'm still astonished that Hamas is now going to deliver every single last bit of leverage it has. And Israel will still be, we don't know exactly how far inside of Gaza, but Israeli troops will still be at some line inside of Gaza, and Hamas's survival is not yet guaranteed, and its future role in Palestinian politics is not guaranteed. So the fact the president has been able to get us to this point that so many people thought really was probably in the back of their minds, we'd never see this day come after these 2 horrendous years, a real nightmare. And he's gotten us here is just a real true credit to President Trump and the administration and their negotiators for putting it out there and being willing to do so, to take this risk where lots of other people have failed, and to bring really the most powerful, influential stakeholders around the world together around this common plan and agenda. That's real American leadership for everybody that we all should applaud.
And I want to put this up on the screen as well. First, again, if you're just now joining us, we're going to keep continuing to reset. Trump has officially put on a social media post that Israel and Hamas have agreed to sign the first phase of a Gaza deal. All of the details are not out at this time, but we're sitting here and we're talking with Jinsa John Hanna. He's had very important roles there within the government, understands what it's like behind the scenes when some of these conversations are happening. But I wanted to put this up on the screen as well here. We had actually broke this just about an hour ago. This was put out by Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, saying that on Friday morning, which is in just 2 days now, that President Trump will be visiting Walter Reed Medical Center for a planned meeting and remarks with the troops. While there, President Trump will stop by for his routine yearly checkup. He will then return to the White House. President Trump is considering going to the Middle East shortly thereafter. I have to ask you, John, does that surprise you at all that the president of course, seeming like they made this sort of announcement, it was almost like reading the tea leaves there that this potential plan and the deal was going to be signed. But now the president is going to be going there himself. What's the importance of the president, the head and chief, the leader of the free world, as he's often called, going there to the Middle East to see this historic thing take off officially?
Of course, it would be huge. There's precedent for it. I was there when President Bill Clinton went to the Middle East to oversee the signing of the Jordanian-Israeli peace treaty in 1994. So, but listen, on this one, Trump deserves it. He is the one who made this happen. Without him, it would not have happened. Without his plan, it would not have happened. Without his force of will and leadership and involvement, engagement at the deepest levels, this wouldn't have happened. So the fact that President Sisi of Egypt has invited him there, wants him there, and the president is going to come, not stand aloof from this, but to obviously claim victory for the United States and for himself, because it is an enormous personal accomplishment, but to actually lay hands on this agreement as a sign to the entire world that the United States stands behind this deal. We helped make it happen, and we haven't finished yet. We're going to continue to push forward the Trump 20-point plan to try and see as much of it as possible gets implemented. And from this, once we are able to begin putting the situation in Gaza into a better place, I'm sure with this coalition that the president has built of regional countries, including Saudi Arabia, that he's thinking much bigger about a much bigger peace plan for the Middle East that essentially brings Israel together with virtually the entire Arab and Muslim world in some kind of much larger expansion of what we've known as the Abraham Accords. I think this is a launching pad to that. Of course, the Nobel Peace Committee has its announcement that it's going to make, I believe, on Friday about who's going to be the recipient this year. And I don't know whether, together with Trump's other diplomacy, this initial phase in Gaza gets him all the way to this year's prize. But I wouldn't be surprised if it does, because again, the world tonight, with this announcement and the prospect that the end of this horrible 2-year war is closer than it's ever been, is just the world is breathing an enormous, enormous sigh of relief. And for the first time, we've got some real optimism that maybe tomorrow or next week or next month even can hold something better than the horrors we've been subjected to in Gaza over the last couple of years.
And so I certainly appreciate you for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. John Hanna with Jen. So extensive experience talking about this and also just watching. I appreciate you for taking us through some of the ins and outs. Still so early. We don't know all of the details, but what we do know, we appreciate your expertise.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And so we're going to continue on here on Live Now from Fox with our coverage. We're not going to go away for any commercial breaks. We're going to be staying right here with you in case more details continue to emerge there as this first plan of peace has officially been announced. And so I'm going to put this back up on the screen. If you're just now turning on your TVs, we're just now getting to the half hour, but this was announced at the tail end, just about on the East Coast, I should say, just about 6:50 or so p.m. But President Trump putting this out on his Truth Social site. I'm going to read the statement in full, saying that I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon. Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as the first steps towards a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. We thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers. He ended up signing that post off. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. And so that was posted to his Truth Social just before the top of the last hour. And so I want to put this up on the screen as well here. This is from Benjamin Netanyahu. We do know that he is also responding on social media to this announcement being made. He said, with God's help, we will bring them all home. And so, of course, we know that this war has been going on for over 2 years at this point. And so it was back there on, it was just today that a senior Hamas official said that negotiations from his Palestinian militant group in Israel had exchanged a list of prisoners and hostages who would be released should a deal be reached during this ongoing Gaza ceasefire talks that have been happening there in Egypt. Of course, we know that Israel is hoping that the talks will lead to the release and the recovery of the remaining 48 hostages that were seized during the Hamas-led October 7th, 2023 attacks. We just had the 2-year anniversary yesterday, of whom are meant to be alive. And so we do continue here. I'm going to put up this live vantage point that we have there over the Gaza Strip. I'm hearing now from some of my producers that we have an updated statement as well from Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm going to put this up so I can put it on your screen in full. I was just speaking with our last guest, John Hanna. I said, one-word statement. I was expecting more. He said, I'm sure that we'll get more in the next few minutes. And he was right. So putting this up on your screen, this is from Netanyahu saying, a great day for Israel. Tomorrow, I will convene the government to approve the agreement and bring all of our dear hostages home. I thank the heroic soldiers of the IDF and all of the security forces. Thanks to those whose courage and sacrifice we have reached this day. I thank from the depths of my heart President Trump and his team for their mobilization for this sacred mission of releasing our hostages. With the help of the Almighty, together, we will continue to achieve all of our goals and expand peace with our neighbors. Signed off there, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And so much to continue to dive into here on Live Now from Fox. What I'm going to do is leave this statement up on your screen so you can understand and really see what the Prime Minister of Israel has said. We're going to be talking behind the scenes with our other guests, ready to bring them on to continue on this conversation as this breaking news is being brought to us that Israel and Hamas have signed the first phase of a Gaza deal. And we will be bringing on those guests in just a moment here, just getting them set up behind the scenes. But again, if you're just now joining us here on Live Now from Fox, you're able to see that we're really discussing what is happening. I want to put this up on the screen as well, live vantage point of the Gaza Strip, as President Trump has officially announced this a peace agreement, the first phase of the Gaza peace deal being announced there as well. And so it's been over 2 years of fighting that we've been watching these two groups go back and forth, and hostages, 48 still remaining at this point in captivity. And so what we're going to continue to do here on Live Now from Fox is making sure that we're bringing you all angles of this as we're learning more. And so the next portion of our conversation, I'm going to bring in friend to the show, political analyst Brian Sobel, as well as the FDD. We're here with Miriam as well. Miriam and Brian, I'm going to put you on screen to make sure that everybody at home as well can hear you. We appreciate you for being with us here on Live Now from Fox. Are you guys able to hear me as well? Are you both able to hear me, Miriam and Brian? All right, we're going to work on some of that technical issues that we're having behind the scene as far as being able to hear.
I think they have trouble with the audio.
Yeah,
We
no
cannot hear
audio.
them.
I think we may have gotten it fixed. Miriam, Brian, are you guys able to hear me?
Absolutely. How
Great.
you doing,
Yes,
Christina?
ma'am.
Thanks so much for hopping on. Obviously, a very historic day as President Trump has just announced the first phase of this peace deal. Let's dive into it. First, I'm going to start with you, Miriam. You've been doing this and covering this extensively there with the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, Federation, excuse me, the Defense of Democracies. The FDD's been talking about this. We've been watching everything. What was your initial reaction to seeing that this deal and the first phase has officially been signed?
Well, it's good to be with you tonight, Christina, on a momentous night. Obviously, this has been 2 years in the making. We are 24 months onto a long and tremendous war that the Israelis have engaged in after the October 7th massacre committed by Hamas. And this is an important and pivotal moment in this war. Obviously, we know that President Trump was keen on getting a deal done, and the timeline was set earlier this week. And in the past few months, the President and Secretary Rubio have made it clear that this deal needs to happen. And the fact that it's being done in Egypt is important. And the fact that it's being done now is even more important. And I think as we begin to learn some of the more nuanced details of the deal, more will be uncovered on what exactly this means. What did Hamas agree to? What concessions was Israel able to make? And what skin in the game do the Arab countries, particularly Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, and the U.S. have moving forward?
And I think you pointed out something that's very important for our viewers at home to understand is that with this initial announcement, very few details. And so that's yet to be seen as to really what this means and how it will play out. But again, political analyst Brian Sobel is here with us as well. Brian, I'm going to ask you about some of the other portions of this deal that sort of go into the political side, especially as it pertains to President Trump. And so with him deciding to make this announcement on his own platform, Truth Social, what does this mean for the legacy of the Trump administration as they played a major portion in closing out a war that impacted so many countries all around the world, with some folks tearing different sides? I have to ask you, what does this mean for his legacy, and why was it so important for him, as you think, maybe to put his face in front of it?
Well, to what has happened now, we are waiting to see the details. These kinds of deals in the Middle East have been fragile forever, and they tend to unravel quite often. So now at this juncture, the hope is that this deal will stick. And of course, Donald Trump, who has been talking a lot about all the wars he's stopped around the world, this is, other than Ukraine, the #1 place in the world where for so many decades war has been prevalent. And so I think Donald Trump views this as you point out, as a legacy issue. But I think we also have to think about the ability of past presidents to find peace in the Middle East. It's been very difficult. If Donald Trump can pull this off, it's a major, major win.
And it might be a major win. I want to put this up on the screen. This is from Trey Yanks there at Fox News. Of course, we rely on him heavily as he is their Middle East correspondent, saying President Trump announces that Israel and Hamas signed off on the first phase of the peace plan. Israeli media reports that living hostages are expected to be released on Saturday. The IDF will pull back forces to agreed upon lines. If things go as planned, the war is ending. I mean, powerful words there from Trey Yanks. This is what so many people have been waiting to hear for the last 2 years. Miriam, I want to ask you, Saturday, are you going to be sitting on pins and needles to see if this truly happens? What other indicators are you all there at the FDD or other agencies going to be watching to make sure that this goes as planned and those hostages are released?
Absolutely. I think you put it succinctly. What we've learned from ceasefire deals in the past 24 months is that they come together much faster and much easier than they fall apart. These things fall apart in moments. But the good news is that we have some vested and invested parties here, whether the Israelis, the Americans, the Turks, the Qataris, and the Egyptians. There seem to be, all of these parties seem to have skin in the game when it comes to making this deal hold. Now, it'll really fall on Hamas Hamas's shoulders to follow through with the hostage release. We're hearing early reports alleging that some 20 plus hostages are still alive and that they will be part of the initial phase of the ceasefire, and with the deceased, the murdered hostages coming at a later phase. In the coming days, I think what will be really important to watch is just how much pressure the Arab countries, the Arab mediators that have been part of this deal, continue to put on Hamas to ensure that they hold up their side of the deal.
And so, Brian, I want to ask you this. When it comes to these negotiations that happen between different nations, how difficult is it to get all players to come to the table and really agree? I mean, when we're talking about this significant meeting that's happened there, we heard that the United States was present. We know that someone that was sent from Benjamin Netanyahu's office was also present, as well as representatives from other nations, including Qatar and Turkey. How difficult is it to make something like that happen between leaders from all over?
Incredibly difficult, and history shows us that putting all those people into a room is incredibly difficult. And when one studies the history of the Middle East, you can see why. They are at cross purposes in many, many different ways, these various countries. But Miriam hits the nail on the head. You have a lot of players at the table with this agreement that have not heretofore played a major role. I mean, they've been involved. Egypt's been involved, and the Turks and others. But we've been waiting for the longest time, Christina, for these countries to actually say, hey, enough is enough in the Middle East, and the killing has to be brought to a halt. And again, that hasn't been the case in past years, but we all are, as you say, on pins and needles that this may hold, that the hostages will be released, that those who have passed will also, their remains will be released, and eventually we can get on with the rebuilding of Gaza and the relief for the people who live there.
This will certainly change the shape of what we know as the Middle East now, putting up this live shot once again there in Gaza. Again, this has been officially now reported by the Associated Press, so I want to make sure that I put it out for our viewers as well, as even though we just touched on it. But this is from the AP, that Hamas plans to release all 20 living hostages this weekend. People familiar with the matter told the AP, while the Israeli military will begin that withdrawal from the majority of Gaza. That's similar to what we heard there from Trey Yinks there with Fox News as well. And so as we're continuing to dive into really what's going to happen next, Miriam, I think you brought up a good point, talking about the fact that some of these ceasefire agreements over the last 24 months have come and gone. And so with significant portions here, let's talk a little bit about the families. They should be optimistic at this point, but what have they been really talking about in the wake of those attacks and not seeing their loved ones for now 2 years' time?
Absolutely. I mean, the Hostage Families Forum has been outspoken throughout these last 24 months, rightfully so, demanding the release of brothers, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, whether it be alive hostages or deceased ones, and some of them don't even know. So this is really a momentous time for Israel and the Israeli people, knowing that their hostages are coming home or their deceased are coming home. And this has really been the pain point of this war, right? We've seen several ceasefire agreements come and go, and the hostages has remained top of mind, top of priority for the Israelis and the Americans. We need to get these hostages home. And I mean, think about it. I remember where I was on the morning of October 7th, and I know how much life has happened between that day and today. And think about if you were a captive, a prisoner, a hostage in Hamas, in tunnels for 24 months as bombs are being dropped on Gaza, and Israel has proceeded with its offensive to try to free those hostages. So I think seeing those hostages, the live ones, be free, be released by Hamas on Saturday will be a very pivotal moment for the Israeli people, for Israel as a whole, seeing them come home. And what comes next will determine what the Middle East will look like. If I were to pinpoint one thing that I would be watching in the days after those hostages are released, are how Hamas behaves. And as we learn more about what the ceasefire agreement details about things like disarmament and post-Gaza war governance, where did the U.S., where did the White House allow those things to land? How much pressure has Qatar and Egypt been inflicted on Hamas to give up some of those concessions that the Americans and Israelis have deemed non-negotiables in ending this war?
And those non-negotiables have been something that have been very focused on. Taking this live look there in Jerusalem, another look that we've often been seeing here over the last 2 years as so many different stages of this war have developed. I do want to continue on with this conversation and just getting an understanding here. Brian, this might be a great question for you to answer as well. Miriam, please feel free to hop in. But I have to ask, why was Benjamin Netanyahu himself not present at these talks? It's interesting to hear that, again, his office sent a representative, very high up representative there for Israel. But why was he himself not there to have these negotiations in Egypt?
It's pure speculation on my part, but typically the head of state is not in those kinds of negotiations because they have to be the ones that have to either explain the success or the failure, and particularly the failure. And Benjamin Netanyahu has been under incredible pressure in Israel, even as Israel has had great success in knocking down and knocking out these terrorists in that region. And so I think it's a way for the chief executive, in this case Benjamin Netanyahu, to be one step removed in case things don't go well. But what we have to wait for here are more details. Whatever Hamas gave up in this agreement will be key to watch. Miriam touched on that. And if they have to give up weaponry, as an example, how does that happen? We do know that that area hit a tipping point, quite probably, as many people who live in Gaza and are not fans of obviously of what has gone on. I think the pressure on Hamas to stop the fighting and to find some role in the future of Gaza, but who knows what that'll be, played a big part here. It was just not sustainable for Hamas to continue to hold down the people in Gaza and continue this war. It just wasn't going to keep going that way. And at the same time, ironically, tremendous pressure on Bibi Netanyahu to find a solution to this. So I think it was one of these deals that just the confluence of many events came together to produce this arrangement today. And we hope, of course, that it can stick.
I want to put up this on the screen as well. This is the statement there from Netanyahu. We visited the statement a bit earlier on in the hour, but it says, quote, "A great day for Israel. Tomorrow I will convene the government to approve the agreement and bring all of our dear hostages home. I thank the heroic soldiers of the IDF and all of the security forces, thanks to whose courage and sacrifice we have reached this day. I thank from the depths of my heart President Trump and his team for the mobilization for this sacred mission of releasing our hostages. With the help of the Almighty, together we will continue to achieve all of our goals and expand peace with our neighbors." Miriam, I'd like to get your reaction to seeing the statement that was put out on social media, specifically by Netanyahu.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a couple things that stand out to me, and I looking at President Trump's statement and looking at Bibi Netanyahu's statement, there are similarities. It seems like there was some sort of agreement on the language used. The one last line that stands out to me in both of these statements is thanking the Lord, thanking a God, whether it be the Christian God or Jewish God. And I think there's quite this moment of this is really nothing short of a miracle on all parties, and seeing it come together just the day after the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th attack really reflects that.
And so we're continuing to also get some more reaction. Thank you for that insight, Miriam. I want to put this up on the screen as well. This is from some of those U.S. senators now finally starting to speak out as well on social media. Brian, I want to understand and maybe get your reaction to this. This is from Senator John Fetterman, a notable Democrat. He says, "I congratulate President Trump on this historic peace plan that releases all of the hostages. Now enduring peace in the region is possible. Our parties are different, but we have a shared ironclad commitment to Israel and its people." This is interesting because he's a very prominent member of the Democratic Party. And so many folks over the last 2 years have really wondered where the line stands between both of these parties on the issue of what's happening between the war in Israel and Hamas, and between the two of them. What's your reaction to seeing Fetterman speaking up on social media?
Senator Fetterman's reaction is not surprising. He has been a stalwart friend of Israel since the beginning, since October 7, that horrible massacre when that occurred, and he has over and over again spoken out about needing to support Israel and supporting the president in this regard. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays with other Democrats. This is an undeniable win for Donald Trump. If peace can truly be found in the Middle East, and we've been talking about it all of our lives, if it can truly be found, then Donald Trump gets the credit in large part for it, because even in the last few days where he basically told Hamas, either you sign on to this deal or it is really all over for you. Some people might call that rhetoric, but in the world, those words mean something, especially in certain nations that are governed by the gun. And so Donald Trump's going to have to take credit for this, and will take credit for it. We'll see over the next couple days whether people can set aside their politics, their political ideologies, to call it what it is, which is a huge success for the president, for the administration, and frankly, for Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government, because I'm sure they had to also give up some things in this agreement, which, again, we wait to see the details of.
We continue to wait as more of those details will come out. But again, I was just handed this note by our producer. This was put out by the Associated Press. Want to make sure that we're getting in all of the updates here for everyone watching at home. Hamas has also officially now announced that deal. They announced a deal that's now leading to the end of the war in Gaza, the withdrawal of Israeli troops, aid entry, and prisoner exchange. And so they're the last group now that's kind of spoken up to affirm that this deal is in place. And so, Miriam, what's your reaction to the group Hamas now saying that they're also announcing this thing? Do you feel like this makes it more steady, more sure in the eyes of those who are really waiting for those hostages to be returned?
Absolutely. I think it was vital that the president announced it first, the American president announced this first, and I think it was also vital that we heard from Bibi Netanyahu saying that he'll be demanding that his government vote to move towards to agreeing to ceasefire. But Hamas's statement is just as important. They are the party that has held out time and time again to agreeing to a ceasefire. I think, again, I know my colleague Brian and I are going around a little bit in circles here, worrying about the details of the deal, because we know the price of ceasefire deals. We know what the price that Israel has had to pay in the last 24 months for the small, brief ceasefire deals. They've had to release hundreds of convicted terrorists and murderers. And I think we're waiting to see what the price Israel has had to pay this time. How many terrorists do they have to release? And what was the cost of getting those hostages? What was the cost of retreating from Gaza and allowing Hamas a little bit of breathing room? Because we have to remember, this is still a battlefield. Hamas is still very much present in Gaza. They are very much militant, have the weapons, have the missiles, have the bullets to continue a war, but they're choosing to come to this ceasefire because all the factors, whether it's pressure from the Egyptians and the Qataris or a number of other factors, have led them to this point.
It's interesting to see so many details, as you say. You're waiting for it. We're waiting for it. We want to bring it to folks. But as soon as we get confirmation of any more details with this initial phase of the Gaza deal, we'll certainly bring it to folks here on Live Now from Fox. My last question before I let both of you go, and I can have either one of you answer. I'll start with you, Brian. But the thing that I think back to, one of the biggest incidents of the year happened to be involving Iran and the incursion that they had in their battle against Israel as well. Is there going to continue to be any fallout from that? Could this deal will this possibly be affected by that at all?
Well, the Iranians have become kind of a second story here, Christina. After the Israeli action against Iran, which claimed that it couldn't be touched really by the Israeli military, and they found out the hard way that they could, along with the assistance of the United States. I think that helped reshape the battlefield and reshape the peace process in the region. I think that helped other countries say, hey, we can get involved in this, and we can bring the killing in the region to an end, in Gaza, in southern Lebanon, in Yemen, and the biggest problem in the region, in Iran. So if this agreement results in other countries having the courage to sit together and say there isn't going to be killing in this region anymore, we are going to find a peace after decades and decades, then the world benefits. And that may be the good news tonight.
Miriam?
Look, we have to remember that the Islamic regime in Tehran is the head of the snake here. We have Hamas, we have Hezbollah, we have all their tentacles, all their proxies, all their militant groups that they help fund, train, and arm. And that is not a finished battle whatsoever. We've seen the Israelis go in there and limit or deter the Islamic regime in Tehran. And we've obviously seen the White House follow up with some really important strikes on Iran's nuclear program. And those were pivotal moments in shaping the future of the Middle East. But I think it would be unwise to call that fight finished.
And so it's something that we'll continue to watch here on Live Now from Fox. I want to deeply thank Brian Sobel, political analyst, for joining us here on the show, as well as Miriam Mahaba, their research analyst at the FDD. Your insight has been invaluable to helping our viewers understand what's happening as this breaking news has come out that President Trump announced that the first phase there of the Israel and Hamas war, they've agreed to that to come to an end, and hopefully the hostages will be returning home. It's been announced it's going to happen on Saturday, so I appreciate your time here on Live Now.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Christina.
All right, we wanted to make sure that we're continuing to follow this from all angles. What I'm going to do is put this up on your screen quickly. Again, if you're just now joining us here on Live Now from Fox, this is what we're waiting on. Hamas has now agreed to release all 20 living hostages this weekend. It's reported to be happening on Saturday. This is according to sources, as the Israelis are going to be withdrawing the majority of their troops from Gaza. And so that's been our portion here, just initially breaking this down. I've been with you for the last hour since this news first broke out of the Middle East, with President Trump officially making this announcement. What I'm going to do now is put up a shot there that we have in Gaza. My colleague Austin Westfall is going to take some time and come on and start talking to you as well here. And he's going to continue speaking with experts, answering some of your questions at home, and getting better insight into what's happening in the region and where we go from here. And so thank you for your time here. My colleague Austin Westfall is set to take over in just a few moments.
Okay, my thanks to Christina Evans, who's been guiding you through the past few hours of coverage as we continue to follow this huge story developing out of the Middle East. We're hearing from President Trump on Truth Social that the first phase of his Gaza peace plan has been accepted by both Israel and Hamas. The president saying, quote, all of the hostages will be released very soon. I'm going to be covering the story for the next few hours here. We do have retired Marine Intelligence Officer, National Security Analyst, and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer, standing by. Hal, you, just like me, have been looking for all reaction coming from every corner of the world about this peace plan. Before we get into some of the global reaction, let's talk about the plan itself. What do we know about what was accepted, and what don't we know?
Well, Austin, what we do know is they said phase one. And based on how they're describing that, that is the release of the hostages and or I should say the exchange. The Israeli hostages being released for Palestinian prisoners. And the Hamas was kind of going back and forth on the list of Palestinian prisoners to be released. It's not entirely clear what that finalized list looks like, but they appear to have come to some sort of agreement. And as a bit of a clarification, it wasn't quite clear initially if it was all the prisoners, all the hostages are going to be released, but now I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be all the hostages, and that's living and deceased. There's estimated to be probably up to about 20 living hostages, and then more are the remains of those deceased. And I should also mention that some of the deceased remains have basically, they were deceased before, they were actually deceased on October 7th. So they've been basically being held for quite some time. Well, they're all going to be sent back. is what we're hearing. And this is huge. The other thing it mentions is putting aid in there. And of course, aid is absolutely desperate right now to get aid within Gaza across the board. That is truly pressing. And I think finally there was just reports after reports that the Palestinians, the residents of Gaza, were just absolutely fed up with what was going on, and they were actually blaming Hamas more than Israel for what was happening. And many who had been somewhat supportive after October 7th had completely switched, and they just had it. And I think that message finally got through. And so Hamas relented. And of course, the other thing they really was holding up phase one was how far does the Israeli Defense Force fall back? And apparently they have agreed to a line where the IDF falls back. Now, I don't have the details on which line that is. There were a few lines out there. You know, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, Hamas came out and said, we want the IDF to completely withdraw from Gaza, which that wasn't going to go anywhere. So apparently they have relented on that demand. And here we have what appears to be a phase one agreement.
We don't know whether Hamas will demilitarize, for example. That's one of the big questions unanswered tonight.
That's huge. We don't know about the disarming and demilitarization of Hamas. That, of course, that is an enormous issue because, frankly, if they were to disarm Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad as well, then those groups have kind of hit an existential crisis, which is who are they? And the other part was that Hamas cannot be part of the governance entity in Gaza afterwards. Again, that gets to what is Hamas, and they have a bit of an existential crisis. And I'm not surprised. You may recall we talked about yesterday that phase one was probably the one that would be, it'd be easier. That would be the one that they kind of get done first. They could agree to that. The other phases, apparently not. Now, there is some risk. There's a risk across the board. Obviously, Israel's taking a lot of risk doing this because while they pull their forces back, Hamas could be repositioning forces, strengthening their front lines, if you will, rearming, all sorts of stuff that Hamas may do, and setting up booby traps and stuff. So if when the Israeli troops pull back, they may have to be told to turn around and go forward if this thing falls apart, in which case they may be fighting for territory they've already uncovered, and that territory may be permeated with booby traps and all sorts of stuff. So it's very deadly ground. So that's a risk. The risk for Hamas, though, is once they give up those hostages, Israel will probably be less reluctant, if you will, to hold back on military force. If Hamas goes, dare I say, sideways, if they violate the rest of the agreement or they just simply don't come to terms, it does make it a lot easier for Bibi Netanyahu politically to press the offensive further in Gaza, because there's no hostages' lives at stake. And of course, for the protesters within Israel, if there's no Israeli hostage lives at stake, well, frankly, those particular protests won't be protesting because all the hostages are back. So there's risk on both sides.
This is for anybody joining tonight who hasn't been caught up to speed on what the president announced. This is exactly what he put on Truth Social. I am very proud to announce that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed-upon line at the first steps toward a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim worlds, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers. Hal, he mentions the United States, Turkey, Qatar. The mediators played an important role in all of this. I should mention Egypt as well was the fourth country there. Those four nation states, Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, the United States, are those going to be the states that are policing both of the belligerents during a potential ceasefire? Is that what it seems?
See, that's the big question, and verbally, verbally, I would say yes. I'm not sure. I don't know if Turkey wants to send peacekeeping troops down to Gaza. I'm not sure if Qatar wants to put troops in there, and a number of other troops have been looked at across the board. Egypt has a lot of reasons why they would not want to put their troops in Gaza. As you recall, Gaza at one time was Egyptian territory before it was became, however you want to say it, liberated or whatever, occupied by Israel. It was it was a strip of land that actually belonged to Egypt, and obviously it's fraught with peril. Hamas, for example, actually came from the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood back in 1987. That is a fiercely anti-regime or anti-Egyptian regime or group. That's who the current government had to basically depose in order to get in power, because they did come to power. So there's a lot of reasons why they may not want to put their troops into an area where you have Hamas, which basically has its roots going back, to its Egyptian ideology, if you will, or the ideology coming out of Egypt. And so there's a reason why those three countries may not be. But I would never rule anything like that out. There's been a number of other countries that have been talked about. Saudi Arabia, obviously. Interesting, Pakistan and Indonesia. And I find that interesting because, first off, they're not neighboring countries. In fact, they're not even regional countries. They are pretty far afield. I mean, you're talking with Pakistan, that's technically the Middle East, but getting into South Asia. And then, of course, when you talk about Indonesia, that's Southeast Asia. Very large Muslim countries also have very large militaries. And so you might see that would be an interesting solution. I think that might be something that might work. I would also point out that historically, at one time, Saudi Arabia just signed a extensive agreement with Pakistan, mutual defense type of agreement with them. And at one time, if you go back in history, I believe it was Pakistan kept a division in Saudi Arabia to support the royal family there. So there is a history of Pakistan keeping large levels or large force levels overseas in the Middle East for various purposes. So Pakistan could end up maybe taking a big role in this. That'd be rather interesting to see.
Let's show how Benjamin Netanyahu is reacting to this on social media. Of course, it was President Trump who made the official announcement, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did post in Hebrew. Jennifer Griffin, Fox's Pentagon correspondent, has the translation. He says, "A great day for Israel. Tomorrow I will convene the government to approve the agreement and bring all our beloved hostages home. I extend my gratitude to the brave IDF soldiers and all the security forces whose courage and sacrifice have brought us to this day. I offer my heartfelt thanks to President Trump and his team for their dedication to this sacred mission of freeing our hostages. With God's help, together we will continue to achieve all our goals and enhance peace with our neighbors." Peace with Israel's neighbors. Where does the Netanyahu administration fall into this entire peace negotiation? So the original leaks that I was seeing coming out of the region were coming from largely Arab media sites. They were saying that this deal had gotten done. Then we started to hear leaks from other news outlets here in the States saying, okay, the White House, we're starting to hear some leaks from there. The Israeli perspective. What do you make of how Netanyahu is phrasing this? What do you make of his language? And what do you make of, well, it seems like we're going to get a hostage release here in the next couple of days. What does that mean for Netanyahu's government?
Well, first and foremost, for Bibi Netanyahu, he had to figure out how he was going to explain this to his cabinet. And I imagine he has been spending some time talking to each and every member of his cabinet, explaining what this is, why they had to do it, why they had to take a deal, and trying to keep his coalition from falling apart. There have been, a number, the far right members of his cabinet have expressed great dissatisfaction, loathing, if you will, for any peace agreement. Their feeling was that the military should just go in and basically crush Hamas in Gaza. and those are some of them are the same ones that say that Israel should also simply annex completely everything in the West Bank. And that's just not going to fly in the international stage. It's not going to fly with the United States. That's not our position that they should be allowed to do that. And so with that, he had to kind of work. He had to kind of massage his own coalition, if you will, to make them amenable. So I imagine he's been using a little bit of time here to try and shape his message, not just for the Israeli people, and he wants to shape it in such a way that obviously he wants to bring as much political credit for what has happened onto his administration and what's been accomplished there, but also to really work with those factions of his cabinet that were predisposed to simply walk away. And if that cabinet falls apart, the government falls. As the government falls, an election comes up, and then he could be voted, very likely, be voted out of office. And if he's no longer in office, then he's facing some time in court and the potential of being convicted of serious criminal offenses and potentially going to prison. So he's got a lot of reasons why he wants to stay in office, and that's why he wanted to probably was working this very hard behind the scenes.
Taking a live look at Jerusalem on this, what is now Thursday morning, Israel Standard Time, just past 3 in the morning there. Interesting, Hal, that this deal, I mean, it came through in the evening hours here in the States, but this was announced. Maybe it was because President Trump needed to make the official announcement, but do you find it interesting that this was made basically in the middle of the night in the Middle East?
I think they're all working late.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think they were all, the reason it came out is probably a really, really long day. And the negotiators are going back and forth. And I know my this is a I don't know if it's a hypothesis or whatever. Obviously, there was no announcement on a phase 2, okay, or anything beyond phase 1. And I think what they did was they probably just hit a point. They said, look, can we agree just on this? Can we get the aid to the people involved? Can we get this taken care of? And can we get the hostages out? And so they reached an agreement on that. And I think that was pretty much, they said, look, let's get this done. And also, I also think that, President Trump was putting a lot of pressure on this. He wants, he's made it very clear he wants to be a peacemaker. And he really wanted to get this war ended. And I think that the U.S. was putting a lot of pressure on Israel to come to terms on this thing. And I think the Arab countries and certainly Turkey, all the other mediators, if you will, were putting a lot of pressure on Hamas. And I think a lot of this is, we saw where Israel had picked up the military offensive, not in Gaza City, but around Gaza City in the last few days. And I think that was kind of bringing home to Hamas in very kinetic terms that this was it. It's time to make a deal, because if they don't, they will be militarily destroyed.
And I had a question. One of my web producers here in the room actually asked me that question today, is what does Hamas get out of any sort of deal at this point? Is that what they get out of this? They don't get whatever would have come. Trump was threatening, by the way, hellfire, something along those lines. Is that what they get out of it? They don't get any more military activity in Gaza? No more bombings?
They're like, what they really get is survival.
Yeah,
they get to survive, and there may be something within there where they don't live to fight another day, but they do live on to maybe become part of some future political discourse of how things happen within not just Gaza, but I'm sure they got their eyes very much on the West Bank. I would not be surprised if one of the discussions that they're having is that Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as part of this, have to recognize Israel's right to exist. I would not be surprised, but I would imagine that's a negotiating point where they would also turn around and say, well, then Israel has to recognize the eventuality of a Palestinian state, which I have to tell you, again, goes back to Bibi Netanyahu's coalition. And that would be a tough pill for them to swallow. And it would be very difficult for them. And frankly, even in the body politic of Israel right now, there's just tremendous doubt, if not opposition, to the idea of a Palestinian state based on what they saw from October 7th, based on what they've seen since. It's just great fear that it would create a terror state right there on their doorstep, an autonomous, sovereign terror state. So they're not really inclined to go that direction. But I can see where this is, I can see where this is potentially leading. And also, of course, the other carrot for Israel on that is if they can just say something about a Palestinian state at some point in the future, that gives a reason enough that Saudi Arabia and Israel could normalize relations. And frankly, what was the biggest cause of the October 7th attacks? What was the biggest cause of this whole war? The fear that Hamas had that Saudi Arabia was going to normalize relations with Israel and leave them off on the side. And so it would give them something to claim, something they could say.
I got to ask you, Hal. We've been seeing, and it looked like our Gaza bump might have just petered out on us. Looks like we lost our vantage point of Gaza. We'll remedy that. We'll try and get it back. We saw blasts live while you and I have been talking. I was talking with Alone yesterday, and he said sometimes the belligerents in these wars, we just got our shot back. Sometimes the belligerents in these wars, if they know that we're on the cusp of some sort of ceasefire, sometimes some last jabs will be thrown before the actual truce begins. Could that be what we're seeing or something else?
That's been true in every war, all right? In fact, that's kind of the theme of that All Quiet on the Western Front from World War I, where, basically the main character gets all the way up to, pretty much armistice day, and then it doesn't quite make it. And so that does happen, that in these things that they will sometimes do what I would call shaping things, where they see targets and it's not quite peace yet, but they have a chance to take out, a high value target. And certainly, if they, for example, if there was a high value Hamas leadership target, I imagine that would be an active discussion, which is, should we take the shot or, do the strike? And so, yeah, sometimes you will see stuff like that.
Okay, we're getting this in. My colleague Josh Breslow sending this out. This is from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. This is new. It says Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump. The two held a very emotional and warm conversation, congratulating each other on the historic achievement of signing the agreement for the release of all the hostages. The Prime Minister thanked President Trump for all his efforts and for his global leadership. And President Trump congratulated the Prime Minister for his determined leadership and the actions he led. The two agreed to continue their close cooperation. In addition, the Prime Minister invited President Trump to address the Knesset. So, what sticks out to you, Hal? Obviously, we do know, and by the way, maybe you've seen the same images that I've seen. There were images circulating on social media showing the mediators in the room and everybody hugging and shaking hands. We're talking about the Hamas side of things, the Israeli side of things, and the mediators. It seemed like everybody was very much pleased with how things shook out. And now we're seeing that the Prime Minister is inviting President Trump to address the Knesset. What does that mean?
That's actually a big deal. Of course, that's their parliament. That's like their Congress. Yep. We've had Bibi Netanyahu over here addressing, Congress. And I think the last time he did it was a little bit controversial, as I recall. But he's done that, and that is always a big honor when a foreign head of state is invited to come over and address the legislative branch, if you will. Okay, that is a huge thing, and the fact that President Trump, I don't think he'd be I don't recall. I think he may have done this. He may have done this in his first term. I'm going to have to go back and check. It wouldn't be the first president to address the Knesset that I'm aware of. But that is a huge distinction, and it's a great honor, and it would certainly be a great capstone event on this agreement that he goes over there and does that. And it's a big thing. I mean, if you recall, when this war was going for quite some time, it was tough. I mean, just getting in our diplomats, like Secretary Rubio's stuff, was tough because remember there was missiles coming in at the airfields, and Hezbollah was shooting missiles in, and there were missiles coming out of Gaza on a constant basis. And then was that little war with Iran that took place in June. And so it's just getting in and out of Israel had become quite a challenge over the last 2 years. And so this is a big deal. He'd be flying in there on Air Force One, and then obviously meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu, but then going to address the Knesset. This would be quite the event. And frankly, I'd be kind of curious as to what exactly he would say. I'm sure it would be a lot of laudatory language about Bibi Netanyahu's role in this whole thing, and certainly what Israel has accomplished in dealing with the threat of Hamas. And but it would be interesting to see exactly what that speech would consist of.
I was just looking up how many days it's been since October 7th, 2023. 732 days has passed. 2 years.
2 years.
We're talking about yesterday marked 2 years on the nose. And now here we are talking about a peace plan, and very shortly here, the release of the remaining living hostages. Let's not let it get lost on us how big of a deal it is that these largely, and I believe at this point it is all Israeli citizens, the living hostages that remain in captivity. 730 days they've been in captivity. Hal, can you put into perspective how big of a deal this is? Not only for the hostages, but also this has been something every single week. We've seen hostage rallies in Tel Aviv. Speak to the hostage angle of all this.
The political side of this, obviously, we see it. I'll tell you where they really see these rallies, these big events. Demanding the release of the hostages. Putting tremendous pressure on Netanyahu and the government to come up with any deal possible to get these hostages back alive. It has been a dominant theme in Israeli politics, literally over the last 2 years, and of course, just it's down to 20 hostages, which is a huge. There's a lot of hostages that have been released, obviously, but it's down to the 20, and of course, the pressure has been picking up tremendously, particularly with the Israeli Defense Forces going into Gaza City, the last big bastion where Hamas is really holding out, and of course, the fear that militarily solving this would probably put a lot of the hostages at great risk, and you wouldn't see very many of that 20 make it out alive. That was a great fear. So this is an enormous thing. Now, for the hostages themselves, this has been just an absolute unbelievable ordeal. Their treatment has just been absolutely horrendous. It's from everything I've seen, it's amongst the worst situations I've seen of any prisoners. And I'm not going to say prisoners of war; they are hostages. There is a distinction on the Geneva Convention, but just the way they're treated. Some of the hostages were summarily executed, from what we understand, and you can imagine many of the hostages had that thing where they would just many times their captors, when they have no discipline. When they really don't care, will do things like mock executions and stuff, and these things just take a phenomenal toll on the psyche, on the mental state, if you will. Along with the fact that many of them were held in tunnels where they didn't see sun for a very long period of time, cramped quarters. The fear of not just being killed by Hamas, but the possibility they could be killed with a cave-in caused by an Israeli bomb or something like that. It's just, all of the hostages have had serious post-traumatic stress, problems across the board, PTSD issues, and that's just. I hate to say it's a disorder. It is a disorder, but it's also, it's just an outcome when you have somebody go through something like that. So just so amazingly stressful, so psychologically debilitating. It takes time to heal. And by the way, not just psychologically heal, or it's also the physical healing. Got to remember, some of them have been beaten, tortured. They've all been starved. Some probably have medical maladies that have not been treated or properly treated for quite some time. Some of them may have been wounded and had those wounds never really taken care of properly. So there's just a variety of things that are going to have to be done to help these hostages, get back to some some semblance of normalcy. Although, frankly, after something like this with 2 years and this sort of depraved captivity, that normalcy just really, really won't come. It'll take a very, very long time before they hit whatever becomes that new normal for each and every one of them.
So you mentioned this earlier. Phase one has been agreed to. This is not the entire 20-point plan. President Trump announced a 20-point plan. Some of the points are vague, and it will take more negotiating in order to get further phases done. Correct?
The mediators were talking about that. The Qataris were very clear. They said some of these 20 points, they're a little bit vague, and that there was a lot of negotiation that had to go in to really flesh those out to figure out exactly how that could become something that could be implemented. You know, the devil's in the details, so to speak. And so they were wrestling with the devil on this. The fact that they got through phase one, which is, you know, part of the 20 points, the fact that they got through this tells you that they've been successfully wrestling it pretty darn fast. They haven't been in Sharm el Sheikh all that long to actually tackle this. And I'm sure that there was really probably some hope that they get some agreement done on the 2-year anniversary on October 7th. That just didn't come about. But look, they got it done today. And that's very, very impressive that they were able to get that achievement. And clearly they were burning the midnight oil in order to get this done. But you're absolutely correct in that there are you know, there's a lot more in that proposal that has to be worked out, a lot of details. And of course, you know, for Hamas, they're looking at what do we do? Where do we go? What do we become when this is all said? And so those issues of disarmament, demilitarization, governance, do they have a political future, you know, anywhere in, you know, the Gaza Strip or the West Bank? All of these issues have to be worked out. And by the way, the peacekeeping issues, that force either from, you know, Arab countries in the Middle East or from Pakistan, Indonesia on top of that all of that has got to be figured out. I've heard that they're doing some training of Palestinians as a police force. That will have to be quickly picked up and put in place, and that Palestinian police force would then, once trained, and it's not going to be a quick training. It's going to take time. You know, you're putting a police force into a chaotic situation, and some of the police force are going to have to really change the way they do business. Even if they were police before, they are really going to have a new set of rules of force, a variety of other things, in order to be a proper police force, if you will, within Gaza and the West, and eventually maybe the West Bank. I don't know, but there's a lot to be done there. So yes, there's a lot more negotiating. I don't see the negotiators maybe pat each other on the back today, and then tomorrow they're going to sit down and start working on the other parts of that proposal.
Because phase one is an achievement, after all. We have been covering this war almost on the daily for 2 years now, and we haven't seen this happen yet. What's different this time around? What's different about this proposal? What's different about this overarching set of circumstances this week that's allowing for this proposal to move forward in a way that past ones haven't?
Well, I think really one of the things is certainly, you know, when President Trump told Bibi Netanyahu, stop the bombing, and then for the most part, Israel did that. They stopped that forward offensive movement. They announced that we're putting our forces into the defense in Gaza. We're not going to continue prosecuting that. That gave, as President Trump was hoping, and others, that would give the space, if you will, for these negotiations to take place. And obviously that was successful. You know, that space, that lack of constant military pressure in that particular area, it did give some space for the certainly for the Hamas negotiators to look at this and say, okay, we're seeing a window here, and also a chance for them to appreciate what was fully at stake, maybe, if you will. This is very difficult for them. I just saw a flashback there, so I'm assuming that they're doing some last minute things, if you will, before it fully kicks in. But But with that, it gave them time to work through this. And the other thing I got to hand it to all the negotiators is they looked at that plan and they prioritized what do we need to get done first, and then they also looked at it and says what can we possibly of that get done quickly and effectively, and that's this part one. That's what they've achieved, and there were that took some discipline. Took some discipline on the part of the parties involved. Certainly, Hamas and Israel. Both of them have internal political pressures, as we talked about, that they have to deal with. But also, it really was, obviously a certain coordination and common purpose with all the mediators in trying to work towards getting this phase one agreement in place. And of course, the biggest one out of that is getting the hostages out of Gaza, and that's it's a huge accomplishment. Obviously, this is a in sheer numbers. I don't know that this isn't necessarily bigger in sheer numbers than some of the previous things that have happened, but this is it. Once they're done, the hostages are out. Those hostages have been held there for 2 years. They are finally out, and that really changes the dynamic of what can be done. And also, it's a chance for Hamas to demonstrate good faith. If they can do this and do it well, maybe there's a glimmer of getting the rest of the plan, rest of the plan, phase two, phase three, put into place.
We're getting a statement in from Isaac Herzog. He's the president of Israel. He says, at this moment, the heart of Israel beats as one with the hostages and their families. As the prophet Jeremiah wrote, they shall return from the land of the enemy, and children shall return to their borders. We've been looking at these live vantage points of Gaza. That's a camera that's planted in southern Israel, overlooking a portion of the Gaza skyline. As you've alluded to, we've seen a number of blasts taking place. It's tough to see, but there is some dark smoke emanating from one of those blast sites right now as well. We also see a live look of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. The time, Israel Standard Time right now, just past 3:30 in the morning. So you talk about this being a 20-point Trump plan. That is how it's being characterized widely. But it's not just President Trump. There's Secretary of State Marco Rubio. President Trump sent 2 representatives, Envoy Steve Witkoff. Jared Kushner was also present at the negotiations in Cairo as well. Can you give us some sort of insight into who actually does the negotiating? Who is the people? Are they the people that are on the ground in Cairo? Are they the ones that are actually getting the deal done and they're relaying these bigger details to the folks back in the States? That's typically how it goes.
I think Steve Witkoff's probably taking the lead for the U.S. With that. But the State Department would have expert negotiators there working with them, experts on policy and other things that work with these various countries that are involved, the various countries. There'd be I would imagine there's a little bit larger delegation than just, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. There would be others there as well, and others who have relationships, and many times with the actual negotiators, the mediators themselves from the various countries there, like Turkey and Qatar and Egypt, for that matter. And then, for that matter, there could be, for example, some folks at the U.S. Representation could be from our embassies in those countries, that we might send somebody who might be a very good presence, a good voice in the room, as they like to say, who could help move things right along. So that would probably be whom I would expect from our side. I would hope that if there isn't a U.S. military representative there, I would hope they have really good comms, because they're going to need. I mean, look, we're talking about stopping a war. And for the U.S. side, the negotiators need to be talking to someone who really understands the military dynamics on the ground, who understands, that they can throw some of these hypotheticals or look at some of these things with a very different mindset, which is to look at, the terrain, the disposition of forces, what all these things mean. Hopefully someone who has a background in peacekeeping operations, and then maybe some of the things, some of the U.S. experience that we've had in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, but also other places around the world, to get that voice in there to help our mediators basically articulate what will work, and also probably turn around and say, look, you're not going to get there now, so maybe help say, look, let's just get this far, get the win, if you will, get this phase one thing done, and then we'll work on the next one. And these are the issues that we need to address. So help shape that. So that's kind of what I expect from the U.S. side is we're playing that role. But I want to just say one thing about the 20 points. I never got the impression that this was just a White House invention. I got the impression this thing actually came from a lot of discussion with Israel, and some of that was very clear because there was actually a couple points that were reportedly modified when Bibi Netanyahu just met with President Trump when the plan was proposed. But I also got a sense that all the parties there may have had a lot of input into what this needs to look at. This is after, you got to remember, this is coming after 2 years of discussions, of negotiations with Hamas on this thing. And so that 20 points, I'll just say this, the 20-point thing we're looking at now is not something that probably could have been put together a year ago. It just wouldn't have been possible. So there's just a lot of inputs that went into shape that thing as to what can be put out there, what is potentially achievable, what would address all the issues involved.
We're getting in a new post from Benjamin Netanyahu. It says, with the approval of the first phase of the plan, all our hostages will be brought home. This is a diplomatic success and a national and moral victory for the state of Israel. From the beginning, I made it clear, we will not rest until all our hostages return and all our goals are achieved. Through steadfast resolve, powerful military action, and the great efforts of our great friend and ally, President Trump, we have reached this critical turning point. I thank President Trump for his leadership, his partnership, and his unwavering commitment to the safety of Israel and the freedom of our hostages. God bless Israel. God bless America. God bless our great alliance, Netanyahu says. The main goals of Israel throughout the course of this war have largely been twofold since the beginning. That is to eliminate Hamas and to bring the hostages home. So now, Hal, it does seem that Israel is achieving one of its main goals, correct?
Absolutely, and well on the way to achieving its second goal, which is to deal with the threat of Hamas. Now, Hamas's goal is not to be completely destroyed and cease to exist anymore. And so that's something they're going to have to work through. They're going to have to figure out what happens to Hamas, where do those leaders go. This is obviously this is very, very difficult for Hamas to deal with because essentially this entire proposal process is effectively a surrender document for Hamas in many ways. And so they're trying to work through this. One thing I would point out is, there is kind of a rule that you get even though we're calling this a peace agreement or phase one of a peace agreement, we're putting together obviously the hostage release, the exchange of prisoners for hostages. We're putting a big influx of aid coming in, pulling back Israeli forces on the line, but we're really putting together kind of a big ceasefire right now. Now, ceasefires typically, once in place and held in place for a while, will eventually shape into something larger like an armistice and a larger peace agreement. Historically, that's been true. On the other hand, the problems with Hamas, the issues of disarmament and giving up a governance role should not be understated. I think this is going to be very, very difficult for Hamas to fully deal with those issues, to fully disarm. I think within Hamas, and certainly with Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is another group entirely, I think it's going to be difficult to get the rank and file and some of the small units to finally say, okay, let's hand over our weapons. There's just not a lot of trust with Hamas. Hamas doesn't trust the Israelis, and certainly the Israelis do not trust Hamas. And so even with the weapons being turned, if the weapons do end up getting turned in, the great fear will be that there's caches of secret weapons hidden all over the place. ready for the Hamas members to simply run out and all of a sudden rearm themselves. And next thing you know, you got another active, not quite as big as they were before, but a very active terrorist threat of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That's a huge fear. That's also a fear for the Arab states that put peacekeeping forces, and other countries put peacekeeping forces in there. So there's a lot of things. So there's a possibility that they could get through this phase one and things could happen and it could potentially kind of fall apart. And we're kind of back where we were before. So everyone's kind of got that in the back of their minds, which is, let's get this, but it could go either way as they're working down. Just keep the pressure on to get that phase two thing put in place. And certainly, there's certainly plenty of stick there. I mean, the Israeli Defense Forces are there, and you've seen that they have tremendous capability. So there's plenty of there that Hamas realizes, but they're trying to fashion some sort of carrot, if you will, for Hamas that would incentivize them, not just looking at military oblivion from their point, which is being destroyed completely, but also what would incentivize them to essentially lay down their arms and lay down their role as a governing organization.
If Hamas was at 100% strength on October 6th, 2023, is there any reliable way to know what level of strength they're at today? How much has Hamas been diminished over the past 2 years?
It is really an interesting question. There's been a lot of talk about this because, as you remember, I think they had 27 battalions or something like that. And those things got reduced one by one. And we talk about, they're down to the last two. We're down there. And it's tough to say because the way Hamas does numbers for battalions, brigades, or whatever, very different from, say, how the Western counterparts would do that stuff. But essentially, at one point you could have said, well, they're pretty much all these units are destroyed, yet they were still there fighting. And they had kind of broken down to smaller units. They weren't as well organized. They weren't putting up these larger scale defensive actions. They were, defending, but they weren't this big organized force as they were. So in that regard, if you just look at the number of units that are out there operating as larger units, they were just decimated. I mean, they were, 80% or more of those units ceased to be really combat effective per se. But with that said, and certainly they took phenomenal number of casualties. To this day, I still believe that a number of the casualties that they say were civilians were actually Hamas members. And since the only group putting out numbers on casualties was Hamas, I'm absolutely convinced that a lot of the numbers they say were civilians or women or whatever were actually Hamas members that they were trying to camouflage just how many of Hamas were being killed. And I think we're going to find out more about that. But that would fit. To say they gave out completely accurate numbers that would surprise the heck out of me because they've never done that. So, but we don't know exactly how many were killed. There's some estimates about that. But the other thing that was happening as the war was moving in to its second year was we saw a lot of young Palestinian men and boys who were not really part of Hamas. All of a sudden, in the midst of this chaos, were being recruited into Hamas. Now, in terms of raw numbers, in some cases, they say they've kind of recharged their manpower levels with these new recruits. But I would point this out. Number one, they had no way to train them, really. I mean, literally, you bring them in, and it was training by combat. They're in the middle of a war, so there isn't some place where they can go off and do any significant tactical training with them. Away from the fighting. There's no place to go to a rifle range type thing or something like that. I mean, they're in the middle of a war, so there was no way to really train them. So even though you'd say, oh well, look, they lost 1,000, but they got 1,000. It ain't the same 1,000. The 1,000 they have now, these are raw recruits. They just threw a weapon in their hand and say, hey, go defend that building, right? It's like, right, great. How do you defend a building? You'll figure it out. Just go. And of course, they're taking horrendous losses of those. So I'm really kind of curious to see what the final numbers actually look like. How many, and there may be many who pop out of the ground when this is all done and say they were Hamas, that they weren't much. They were there. They may they may look like they're Hamas. They may have been carrying a weapon, but were they really a full-blown combatant, or were they just an armed member of were they an irritant on the battlefield, if you will? It'd be a lot of questions about that.
You know, eliminating Hamas is one thing, but eliminating the ideals of Hamas is a whole separate challenge, correct, Hal?
It's an ideology, absolutely, and that's been brought up since day one. How do you defeat an ideology? And frankly, that is a problem that the United States has dealt with for a very long time. If you look at our wars, what were we fighting in World War II? We were fighting an ideology. Fascism, Nazism. And then after World War II, we had the Cold War. What were we fighting in the Cold War? Well, one would say, well, the Soviet Union. Yeah, but we're fighting an ideology. We're fighting communism, and we're dealing with communism all over the world, and communist recruits and communist converts, if you will, that were popping up not just around the world, but literally in our own hemisphere. We were dealing with that. So we were fighting an ideology then, and of course, leading up to 9/11, and certainly 9/11, we're fighting you could say an ideology. It was a radical theology / ideology. This violent extremist jihadist philosophy, if you will, that was accompanied this caliphate concept that ISIS and Al Qaeda tended to that they basically articulated what they believed in, and of course that had appeal because, as you saw, ISIS propagated little groups, as did Al Qaeda. They propagate groups all over the world as well. And then, of course, Hezbollah. I remember years back, I remember seeing a big flag that was flying, said Hezbollah, Venezuela. Well, that tells you that Hezbollah, this Shiite extremist, ideology, if you want to call it that, yeah, it's got a religious component. I'm not taking away from that, but this, militant ideology that was there as well. So, yeah, it's an ideology. It's very much an ideology, and it's in sync with other ideologies we've seen with Al Qaeda and ISIS and others as well. So that will be something that we deal with. But I want to point out one thing: that issue there, that is one thing where you find a unifying principle. Pakistan doesn't want it. Saudi Arabia doesn't want it. Jordan sure as heck doesn't. Egypt doesn't. Every country in the Middle East doesn't want it. In fact, I would be venture to guess that the new government of Syria, even though they came from Al Qaeda of all things, probably says, yeah, we want to keep that down as well, because we're just trying to figure out how to govern this thing. And if you look at them, they're dealing with ISIS, which is an offshoot of Al Qaeda, and they're trying to stop ISIS. We're trying to stop ISIS. So yeah, dealing with that ideology, that has not gone away. That's still an issue.
We have been seeing blast after blast. I've missed a couple of them on air. We just didn't happen to be showing this live feed at the time. But just about 90 seconds ago, I saw another large blast on this camera. For those who just may be tuning in now, it's not uncommon for two belligerents at war to try and get in one last strike or whatever it might be before an official ceasefire is called off. So if you're wondering, well, the first phase has been agreed to, why are we seeing blasts? That very well could be why we're seeing so many blasts at this hour. Time will tell to get some official reporting about what's happening on the ground. But while we're talking about blasts, let's talk about the truce, if you will, the battlefield from this day forward. I went on TikTok Live. As soon as this story broke, I went in and I asked all the people in the live stream, what are their questions about this deal? And one of their number one questions was, are Israel and either side to actually abide by the terms of a potential ceasefire? Do we trust that they won't fire at one another? How do you handle that question, Hal? And what are you going to be watching moving forward? Would we classify this as I don't know, I remember when Hezbollah and Israel were announcing their ceasefire, it was a flimsy ceasefire. That was a word that was being tossed around a lot. Does this feel similar to that?
It could be a flimsy ceasefire. I don't rule that out. That's why I say I think they could get the phase one, get the hostages out, and and then hit a sticking point where they can't really come to agreement on phase 2. That's very possible. What I will say, though, is historically speaking, throughout this war, that when there was a ceasefire in place, both sides, for the most part, with a few exceptional strikes, whatever you want to call it, here or there, for the most part, both sides seem to adhere to it. The ceasefires, when they're releasing hostages and stuff, they seem to work fairly well within the context of what was going on there. So if I take that as a guide, I think potentially, certainly for getting through this phase 1 piece, that it could hold for fairly well. I think that certainly Israel's going to try and eliminate as many potential problems, which is, I think that's the flashes you see out there in the distance, prior to actual cessation of firing, or cessation of active combat engagement. So that's big. The other thing too is, I just want to say, Hamas and Israel, they don't trust each other at all. All right. It's not even the Cold War with the U.S. and the Soviet Union saying trust but verify. There is just zero trust. It's pretty much all verify. And so they're going to be watching each other very, very closely to see if they're compliant. And I would be shocked if somebody doesn't say the other side violated the ceasefire or something. You can almost predict that's going to happen at some point. The only question is when and what. But at some point, someone's going to say they're violating the ceasefire. But I think a lot of it will be, we're going to have to take it in context. Can they stop fighting? And certainly, if Hamas just starts violating the ceasefire, I don't think Israel will be reticent to respond accordingly. And so, and we're also going to see another problem, which is how organized Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are. You can get the negotiators, the guys who are pretty much out of Doha in Qatar, who live fairly comfortably, in fairly nice quarters there. Sure, they can agree to that stuff. But the folks on the ground, especially considering so many of them are new, they may say, hey, look, I signed up for fighting this, kind of this Salafist jihad type thing. I signed up for something different, and you're telling me to lay down my arms. And some of them, they could break off. So we could see a problem where they're having trouble controlling their own forces. And again, if Hamas is firing on the Israeli forces, I don't anticipate the Israelis are going to be reluctant to return fire.
So Hal, I've got time to ask you one more question. We're going to be talking with Fox's Connor Hansen here in about 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get this in before we wrap with you. What are your main questions going into tomorrow, going into the weekend? What are you watching for? The hostage release will be chief among everything that we're watching in the coming days. But what are your lingering questions about anything related to this deal that was announced?
The first thing, the biggest thing is the mechanics. The mechanics of how the hostages are getting released, how the turnover is going to go, when that's going to take place, and then, of course, the same thing with the corresponding piece with, what Palestinian prisoners are being released and where are they going? That's a big question right there. So that's the first one, is the mechanics on that, and then the details of where are the Israeli forces actually falling back to. That was unclear. It said they've agreed on a line, but it's not clear to me which line that is, and then exactly how they will be arrayed along that line, what the force levels will look like, a variety of things. So those are the first two that jump out. And then, of course, one, just from a humanitarian standpoint, how are they going to get that aid in there? Physically, how are they going to get that aid to those who need it? And that's been a problem all along. Remember, they send those aid trucks in, and an aid truck goes in, people jump on the back, they're stripping off the aid and stuff. By the time the truck gets in there, it's an empty flatbed because all of it's been stolen. And don't forget, they're negotiating with Hamas, which, yes, Hamas steals lots of aid, but they also have criminal groups that are still very active in there. And those criminal groups may look at this as a free-for-all to steal or to rob aid trucks and to make a quick buck or whatever. So there's just a lot of details that I'm going to be looking for.
Hal Kemper being generous with his time tonight. Hal is a retired Marine intelligence officer, the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Thanks, Hal.
All right. Thank you, Austin.
We have another 2 hours of coverage in store for you. We're going to continue to invite our experts, reporters, and analysts on to discuss this agreement between Israel and Hamas. We understand that the first phase of Trump's 20-point plan has been agreed to by both of the belligerents in this war. We do have standing by right now Fox's Connor Hansen. He's bringing us the latest. Connor, what are you hearing about the deal?
Hi, Austin. Well, really a historic night here after 2 years of war, this major breakthrough in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Both sides, as you mentioned, agreeing to the first phase of a peace plan that was proposed by the U.S. All remaining hostages will be released. There are reportedly still at least 20 living hostages who are expected to be returned this weekend. Israeli troops will pull back to an agreed-upon line, and Palestinian prisoners will be released in return. The agreement will also allow aid back into Gaza. The deal hinted at earlier in the day. We saw some of that video when Secretary of State Marco Rubio passed a note to President Trump during a White House event this afternoon. President Trump announced the news later on Truth Social, saying in part, quote, "This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, and all surrounding nations, and the United States of America. And we thank the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers." Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also confirming the news, saying he would convene his government tomorrow to officially approve that agreement. Those two leaders then spoke to each other earlier tonight, congratulating each other on this success. Representatives from both sides, as you know, along with the U.S., Qatar, and Turkey, have been in Egypt negotiating this deal all week. And we're still waiting on exact details on if or when President Trump will travel to the Middle East.
Connor, one question. How much lead time do we typically get on stuff like that? When will we know? When do we expect to have any clarity on Trump's travel plans?
Well, as we've seen with this administration, Austin, these things happen so quickly, and we sort of watched this develop in real time. You know, the president in so many different live events announcing he might have to go there soon, or this deal might close soon. So we know he is scheduled for some events through the rest of the week and Friday. So it's possible he could go as soon as this weekend, but we'll be watching closely to hear what happens next.
Fox's Connor Hansen joining us tonight. Thanks, Connor.
Thanks, Austin.
Our continuing coverage as we take a live look at the Middle East. What I'm going to do here is show you our triple box. We've been looking at vantage points of Gaza, where we've been seeing a number of blasts tonight, by the way. It's approaching 4 in the morning, Israel Standard Time. We've also got our live feeds out of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv as well. Our continuing coverage, we're going to go nonstop with this story. We do have Alon Burstein standing by. Normally, Alon, I check in with you off camera, but I'm going to just roll with it tonight. Can you hear me, and can I hear you? It's looking like we, in fact, cannot hear you. I believe we can hear you now, Alon. Hey, how's it going? All right. So you and I have talked... your guess is as good as mine. How many times we've done segments on this war?
Hundreds. Let's just say hundreds.
Hundreds. Would you say this is one of the bigger news days in the past 2 years, if not the biggest?
Look, it is definitely one of the biggest news days when it comes to understanding what is happening in the war and where things are going. It is not yet at the point where we can say that this is the beginning of, Francis Fukuyama said, the end of history when the Soviet Union fell. This is not necessarily going to be that, whether we're looking at the end of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or even the end of the war right now. A lot of sides are talking about what is going to happen, and it is very, very clear that there's been a major leap forward with regards to a truce between the sides, the release of hostages, the release of Palestinian prisoners, and what everyone is calling the first phase of the deal. But that said, what I have been trying to scramble over the last several hours is to figure out, but what actually has been signed with regards to later on. Everyone's talking about the first phase. The first phase theoretically is supposed to be over in a week. What happens next? everyone is very optimistic at this moment, but 24 hours ago, everyone was very pessimistic. So it's definitely a monumental news day with regards to things moving forward. And I hope that the optimism can continue into next week. But at this point, I'm still trying to scramble for information to see what actually is going to happen next week to see, is that optimism warranted?
Let's say somebody has cautious optimism about this. What are the chief reasons why somebody would have cautious optimism tonight?
So there's a couple of things to look at. You can have optimism over what has happened. First of all, depending on what you're focusing on. And second of all, even long term. If you're focusing on the release of hostages, which is one of the truly main facets of the war, main facets that has driven Israel to continue the war, far from the only one, but main facets that have driven Israel to continue the war. And one of the things that has really touched on people's human side. We have seen different people around the world react, whether they are very critical of Israel or very supportive of Israel. The hostage situation, hostages in general, I have to say, is one of the things that touch upon people. Very few people know about what's happening in Nigeria or Boko Haram. Everyone knew when those girls were kidnapped by Boko Haram. Hostages is one of the things that tends to touch people around the world, not just in relation to Israel, in general, also ISIS and etc. So, with regards to the hostages, this is one of the days to be truly optimistic. Again, I will be fully optimistic and say this has happened when actually the sides publish the deal that has been signed. What all sides are saying, though, is that the 20 live hostages are due to be released by Saturday or Sunday, i.e., in the coming days. That is a true reason for optimism. At the same time, Palestinian prisoners are due to be released, whether you are in support of an Israeli or Palestinian side. A lot of these Palestinian prisoners have been found guilty of mass atrocities of terrorism. However, a lot of them also are arrested in the Gaza Strip on suspicion and other things. A lot of people would also be optimistic that that may curry favor with the Palestinian side towards possibly a de-radicalization or de-escalation. A lot of people would disagree with that. Either way, I'm saying if you're focused on the Palestinian side of prisoners or the Israeli side of hostages, there is reason for optimism. There's also reason for optimism with regards to the ongoing fighting. Israel has agreed to withdraw from where it is, its current positions in Gaza. It has not been published to where exactly. That is one of the big glaring questions for me as someone who follows the war, I would say daily, I'm going to actually say hourly, and tries to understand where fighting is happening. I cannot tell you accurately where the Israeli military is going to fall back to, and that matters greatly, not only for the ongoing fighting, but for the lives of the Palestinians in Gaza. So what we do know is there's going to be a truce. We don't exactly know what's going to happen. So again, all that is on the cautious optimism side. Where the caution comes in is a couple of things. First of all, with regards to the hostages, it is not 100% clear what about the bodies of hostages. There's 48 hostages that we talk about, 20 of them are alive. The deal theoretically was supposed to be for the return of all the hostages. I predicted, I think online with you yesterday, and in my own channel yesterday, I predicted that Hamas would release the live hostages, but not the bodies. Hamas has now said that they can release most of the bodies, but that they don't know the location of 9 of the bodies for sure. It has not been clear. Again, the deal has not been published. So it's not been clear what exactly is included. Everyone's talking about the release of the 20 hostages. It's not clear if Hamas is going to also return the bodies of hostages that they can find. It certainly is not going to return all of them, but the bodies of the hostages it can find, or if the bodies are a later phase. Some reports are saying maybe the bodies will be in next day. That is one of the reasons also the story is not over as far as hostages are concerned. Similarly, on the side of Palestinian prisoners, that is one of the main things. When Trump published the 20-point plan, I spoke to you, I spoke to a lot of different channels. I constantly said a glaring issue is going to be the identity of those Palestinian prisoners. Hamas is going to demand the top Palestinian prisoners, and they have. Marwan Barghouti, Ahmed Sadat, Hassan Salameh, and others. They have demanded their release. Israel has said they are not going to be released. I don't know how that was resolved. If you had talked to me, and I think you and I actually did talk about 3 hours ago.
We did.
I said to you, this is probably going to be resolved, but both sides are really standing firm and saying, we're not going to budge. Trump then came out and said it's all resolved. I don't know. Is Israel going to release Marwan Barghouti and Ahmed Sadat? That may lead to Netanyahu's government falling. In turn, has Hamas agreed to not have their release? That would be very surprising and would almost be a defeat as far as they're concerned. So we don't know. So that's a reason for caution. I will say, with all the optimism, Izzat Arishak, who is one of the prominent Hamas figures, put out a message a few minutes before I got online saying, we are still waiting for the final answer with regards to the list of Palestinian prisoners. That is the first time that I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're saying actually it hasn't been fully agreed yet. Will it be? Probably. It will be very, very damaging for any side to now roll back on after Trump has said yes and said, actually, no, we're making the deal fall through. But I don't know. I don't know. So that's in terms of that caution. And another thing, and this is something we'll probably talk about a little bit more soon, the questions of what happens next. Let's say this all goes through beautifully. The hostages are released, even the bodies are returned, Palestinian prisoners, everyone agrees, everyone's happy, they love each other. It's all well and good. What's happening next week at this time when you and I are speaking? The Trump plan that I printed out in front of me, that's why I'm looking down, I'm looking at the different items. The Trump plan has a vision. It doesn't have an actual day-to-day outline of what's going to happen. Have the sides agreed to that? Or have they not? We don't know. We don't know. And that's the reason for caution. There is a lot of reason for optimism, but there's also reason for caution with regards to the sweeping declarations of the war being over.
So we've been showing this post from Jennifer Griffin. She's Fox News's Pentagon correspondent. She says at least 2,000 Palestinian prisoners are to reportedly get released and exchanged for 20 living hostages, according to Israeli and Palestinian sources. Release is expected Monday. Agreement reached in Egypt, she says. Clarify something. A lot of our audience has this question. Why is one number so much bigger than the other? Why is it 20 hostages for 2,000 prisoners?
So there's historic reasons for this internationally, and there's historic reasons in the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Internationally, it is one of the realities